In a world that can't stop talking, Susan Cain released an influential book titled Quiet, a book that comprises the 10 amazing powers of an introvert. Susan Cain wrote this book to open our eyes to the strengths and contributions of introverts in a society that often seems biased toward extroverts. Whether you consider yourself an introvert, an extrovert, or somewhere in between, understanding the insights in this book can enrich your interactions, help you leverage your own strengths, and help you appreciate the differences in others. In each chapter of this summary, we'll break down the key ideas and show you how these insights can be applied in everyday life. From enhancing your communication skills to rethinking leadership and understanding how environments influence our behavior, there's something valuable for you at any instance. So, if you're willing to challenge how you think about personality and discover how great quieter qualities can lead to a fuller, more balanced life, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to ensure you don't miss any of this series. Let's get started and discover the quiet strength within each of us. Imagine walking down a busy city street in the early 1900s. The world was changing fast, and so was what people valued in each other. Back then, being likable and magnetic became more important than ever. This shift marked the rise of what Susan Cain calls the extrovert ideal. The idea that being social, bold, and assertive is the recipe for success. In schools and workplaces, the most admired weren't necessarily the smartest or the most thoughtful. Instead, those who spoke up confidently and made sure they were noticed often got ahead. But why did this happen? Cain points out a big reason: the shift from a culture of character to a culture of personality. People used to value honor, integrity, and hard work. Over time, those qualities took a backseat to charisma, charm, and other flashy traits. So what's the takeaway from Chapter 1? It's crucial to recognize that this preference for extroversion often overlooks the deep thinkers, the innovators who do their best work behind the scene. It's about balance, valuing different personalities and recognizing that quiet power is just as important as the loud. Chapter 2 of Susan Cain's Quiet is titled The Myth of Charismatic Leadership, the Culture of Personality 100 years later. In this chapter, Susan Cain takes us back over a century to show how the culture of personality grew. Leaders weren't always picked for their flashiness. It used to be about their moral qualities and their ability to lead quietly but effectively. Cain argues that we should rethink our obsession with charisma. True leadership involves listening, thinking deeply, and sometimes leading from behind. It's about making everyone feel heard and empowered, not just following the loudest voice. So what can we take away from this chapter? It's important to value different types of leadership. A great leader isn't always the one who talks the most or shines the brightest. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who guide quietly and with care. Chapter 3 of Susan Cain's Quiet is titled When Collaboration Kills Creativity. The Rise of the New Groupthink and the Power of Working Alone. In this chapter, Cain explains how, historically, the deepest thinkers and most innovative creators often worked alone. From Isaac Newton to Steve Wozniak, solitude allowed deep focus, free from the noise and distractions of group setting. Cain's message is clear. While collaboration has its place, it's crucial to balance it with time for solitary thought. Embracing quiet can lead to breakthroughs that noisy groups might never reach. So what's our takeaway from Chapter 3? Don't be afraid to step back and find your quiet space. Great ideas often start in silence. Think about how you can incorporate more alone time into your creative process. Chapter 4 of Quiet is titled Temperament, Destiny, Nature, Nurture, and the Orchid Hypothesis. In this chapter, Susan Cain asks if our temperament is set in stone from birth, or does our environment shape who we become? Think about this. When a baby is born, are they already programmed to be introverted or extroverted, or does the way they're raised play a bigger role? Susan Cain introduces us to this debate by discussing how both our genetics and our environments significantly influence who we are. Now, let's talk about something fascinating called the Orchid hypothesis. Like orchids, some people are highly sensitive to their environments. They might struggle in harsh conditions, but under the right care, they can thrive spectacularly, maybe even more so than those who are less sensitive. So, what's our big lesson from Chapter 4? It's that being sensitive or introverted isn't about destiny, it's about potential. Whether you're an orchid or a dandelion, understanding and embracing how you interact with the world can unlock your unique strengths. Chapter 5 of Quiet, titled Beyond Temperament, the Role of Free Will, and the Secret of Public Speaking for Introverts. Here, Susan questions how much control do we really have over our introverted or extroverted tendencies? And what's the secret for introverts to excel at public speaking? Ever felt like your quiet nature is something you're just born with? Well, Cain suggests something uplifting. While our temperament lays the foundation, we actually have the power to decide how we act, regardless of our natural inclinations. Now let's look at a scenario many of us dread: public speaking. For introverts, this can feel like a massive challenge. But guess what? There's a secret to mastering it, and it's not about transforming into an extrovert. Here are Cain's tips for introverts on public speaking. Number 1, prepare thoroughly. Know your material inside and out. Number 2, find your passion. Talk about things that matter deeply to you. Number 3, reframe the experience. Think of it as sharing information with friends, not performing. Number 4, practice in safe spaces. Start small and build your confidence. What can we take from Chapter 5? It's that being an introvert isn't a fixed fate. We have the choice to stretch our comfort zones and develop skills in areas like public speaking, all while staying true to our core self. Chapter 6 of Quiet is titled Franklin Was a Politician, but Eleanor Spoke Out of Conscience. The impact of introversion and extroversion on our lives. In this chapter, Susan explains the fascinating difference between two famous personalities, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the extrovert, and Eleanor Roosevelt, the introvert. What can their stories teach us about the impact of our own introverted or extroverted traits on our lives? Franklin D. Roosevelt, known for his charismatic leadership and public presence, and Eleanor Roosevelt, who, though more reserved, pushed for deep social changes out of a strong personal conviction. Their differences in temperament highlight how both introverts and extroverts can make significant impacts in their own unique ways. Susan Cain uses these historical figures to show us that while extroverts may naturally command the spotlight, introverts influence the world through deep thought and moral commitment. This tells us that neither trait is better or worse. They're just different paths to making a difference. This chapter encourages us to appreciate and leverage both introverted and extroverted traits. Chapter 7 of Quiet is titled Soft Power, Asian Americans and the Extrovert Ideal. This chapter explores cultural differences in the perception of introversion and extroversion, particularly in the context of Asian American experiences. In this chapter, Susan talks on the concept of soft power and how different cultures, specifically Asian American communities, view the traits of introversion and extroversion. Susan introduces us to the idea of soft power, the quiet, understated form of influence that doesn't rely on overt force or outspokenness, but on persuasion, cooperation, and subtle influence. It's a powerful approach that often goes unnoticed in cultures celebrating the loud forms of power. This chapter challenges both Asian Americans and others to consider how different cultural values affect individual behavior and success. It encourages all of us to recognize and embrace various forms of power and influence, appreciating that there isn't just one right way to be successful. Chapter 8 of Quiet, titled When Should You Act More Extroverted Than You Really Are? This chapter offers practical advice for introverts on when it might be beneficial to adopt a more extroverted demeanor. In this chapter, we will explore a really interesting question. When should introverts act more extroverted? See it as a practical guide for many of us who lean towards introversion, but find ourselves in situations where a sprinkle of extroversion could be beneficial. First off, let's understand why this flexibility can be useful. Adapting to be more extroverted can help introverts make new connections, lead teams effectively, and advocate for themselves or their ideas in high-stakes environments. But how can you do this without feeling inauthentic? Here are Cain's tips. Number 1, set clear goals. Know why you're stepping out of your comfort zone. Number 2, prepare mentally. Visualize success and rehearse scenarios where you might need to be more outspoken. Number 3, take small steps. Start with short interactions and build your confidence over time. Number 4, recharge. After extroverting, give yourself time to unwind and recharge. So, the takeaway from Chapter 8 is that while being true to your introverted self is important, there are times when temporarily adopting an extroverted approach can be strategic and beneficial. Chapter 9 of Quiet is titled The Communication Gap. How to talk to members of the opposite type. This chapter addresses effective ways for introverts and extroverts to better understand and communicate with one another, offering practical advice to bridge the divide. This chapter tackles a crucial issue: how introverts and extroverts can overcome their communication barriers. Introverts often prefer to think before they speak, appreciate deeper conversations over small talk, and might need a bit of quiet to recharge. Extroverts, on the other hand, might think out loud, enjoy lively discussions, and seek out social interactions to energize themselves. Here are some top tips to help both sides communicate better. Number 1, value the differences. Recognize that each style brings its own strengths to a conversation. Number 2, give and take space. Extroverts give introverts the space to express themselves without pressure. Introverts try to share your thoughts more spontaneously when you can. Number 3, adjust your environment. Sometimes the setting can make a big difference. Choose a quiet spot for serious discussions, but don't shy away from more dynamic settings for brainstorming sessions. From Chapter 9, we learn that understanding and adapting to each other's communication styles not only improves interactions, but also enriches relationships, both personally and professionally. Chapter 10 of Quiet is titled On Cobblers and Generals. How to cultivate quiet kids in a world that can't hear them. Addresses strategies for nurturing introverted children. Here's a unified approach to covering both sections effectively. This chapter is a gem. It's all about bridging communication gaps between introverts and extroverts, and it gives some invaluable advice on raising introverted children in an extroverted children in an extrovert. Ever felt misunderstood by someone who's more outgoing or more reserved than you? Cain explains that introverts and extroverts often have different styles of communication, which can lead to gaps in understanding. But don't worry, we've got tips on how to bridge these gaps. Here are some strategies. Number 1, listen actively. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, make sure to really listen to what the other person is saying. Number 2, adjust your expectations. Recognize and respect the differences in energy levels and processing times. Number 3, find common ground. Focus on shared interests or goals to build a deeper connection. Now, let's talk about the little ones. Raising an introverted child in a loud world can be challenging. Cain offers some wonderful guidance on how parents and educators can help these children thrive. Here's how you can support the quiet kids. Number 1, encourage their interests. Whether it's reading, drawing, or studying bugs, support their passions. Number 2, teach them to advocate for themselves. Help them express their needs and preferences in their own way. Number 3, model and teach social skills. Introverted doesn't mean antisocial. Even quiet kids can learn to navigate social situations comfortably. Chapter 10 of Quiet reminds us that whether we're dealing with adults or children, understanding and respecting different personality types can lead to more effective communication and richer relationships. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced communication challenges with someone of a different personality type? How did you manage to bridge the gap? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more insightful content. Remember, great communication starts with understanding each other's differences.